One reason the laser tag story stuck with me over the years. It was sitting safe in my home in my state of Florida. Being naive, I'll admit, we used to have our fair share of strange people and places. The state has a bit of everything, and is probably the largest just micronoscom of the America outside of New York City. And all across of that hot, muggy, flatland, central Florida, there are locals that can defy all the logic and reason. We have no typical tourist traps here. Creepy toys were just one of the most recent message boards I have scoured and the only I moderated. I visit many more of the back of the social internet days, early web, like the mid 90s, and when the Equid setting thing was at the infancy, and then if you owned a successful message board, you were a rock star. There was a smaller one I happened upon, which I am sure is long gone by now. It was meant to attract fellow Floridians and their offbeat tales and experiences. I visited every so often, more as a lurker, never then posting, because my boring life did not lead much to share. The main forum that was a place of where users posted their real life strange stories that happened anywhere in Florida, whether they lived here or were just visiting. Empathists was a strange place called a real aspect. But of course, you could say anything you want on the web. I'm sure many of the posts were truthful. Now we'd call most of them trollfics. During 3 a.m. reading section one night, my eyes locked into some thread title, suspiciously on two of its words that were written by a girl my age. I will simply call her Kate. She posted, "Anyone remember Kittyland?" And upon seeing the name of this place, some dark recess of my memories lit up. Somehow, I already knew it was a location, and not some TV show or book or something else. I think I visited a place called Kittyland when I was young. For some reason, I forgot all about it until just recently. Maybe it was in Central Florida? My parents used to take me all over the state. Dad was a photographer who liked to take photos of weird little theme parks, such as the dot in the interstates. Can that be plural? Like highways. I remember most of them clearly, which is kind of a feat when like the big ones like Disney World and Universal Studios overshadowing all over the smaller parks. That's weird if I have to concentrate. I can still get the clear memories, almost everything from the wee geeky wet watching mermaids into Dinosaur World, but this Kittyland thing, not so much. It may have been incredibly lame, judging by its name alone. It was probably some sad little park that didn't leave much of an impression. So why am I thinking about it so much all of a sudden? Why, when I look through all of my dad's photo albums, I do not see its sign anywhere. He would just shoot anything, and always the front gates. Was this place even for real? I scrolled through the replies as trying to get the grasp on the forgotten memories that were trying to wriggle up to the surface. Most of the responses were useless as far as answers on similar experiences went, save for one, by a boy also our age. I'll have to go by Jack. Was always a winner of the cover name. You're joking. I thought I was going to go crazy back in third grade when I talked over the other kids about it. I also have forgotten it for a while. Creepy. I thought it was a crappy place. I kinda just remember getting mad at Dad for not letting me go to the bumper cars because I was too young. The only other thing I can really say was this mascot was maybe a Florida partner or something. I wanted to reply back then, but I didn't have anything to contribute yet. And of course, it was strange that this place seemed to be a memory that we all had forgotten about it later, and remembered to have some degree and struggled to clarify, but that was the most uncommon for our childhood recollections. We have places, events, television shows, movies, and other things stored away somewhere, so fuzzily that we wondered if they actually existed or not. But Kittyland stayed like that with me, more presently than anything other recalled memory I've had. After a few days of thinking about it and trying to dig up a single solid image in my mind, I asked my sister if she remembered it all. She was 2 years younger than me, so I didn't expect that what she did. Even so, she ended up helping me in a way. One of her first memories was the Cinderella's castle at Disney World. After some mulling, that later gave me a time and a place. I asked my dad soon after, also not expecting much. Parents take their kids to a lot of places, and I knew he wouldn't remember some dumpy old theme park that I probably didn't have fun at all either. He didn't even try to recollect such a place, not at the high ropes to begin with. He changed after the car accident. I say that only barely because he's knowing what it was like before it happened up until now. I had only two steady memories of that entire year: Disney World and my mom's funeral. I guess I tried to bury the latter and never really had sorted out the accident actually happened on the way back home from the resort. Of course, anything between those two moments would have been lost in the memorial oblation. We lived in Old Kyla, an old town northwest of Orlando, for one more year before we moved. I was 7 when we left. We only filled up 2 photo albums since then, mostly vacations and birthday parties. There were far more tucked away in the attic, dusty and unopened for years. I went through them and saw plenty of baby pictures and a few of my first day of kindergarten, but I didn't find any taken at Walt Disney World. I kinda knew I wouldn't. Dad wouldn't have added them, considering what happened. I found that Dad didn't even have them developed, but luckily there was still also labeled, undeveloped rolls of the film in the box. I hope that at the time the attic heat hasn't ruined them. They came out very red and a bit splotchy when I had them developed, but they were the most part readable pictures. As I looked through the 2 rolls, worth of Mickey's Palace, Liz Cressera, 1990s prints, filled with happy background kids, a lot of smiles from my sister and I, and a fine collection of late 80s clothing. I tried to keep my emotions in check and focus on trying to look for any clues. For the most part, it was all just evidence of regular summer vacation. But I did take one thing from the images. It had been a rainy weekend and there were puddles on the ground, many of the pictures, and water droplets clearly visible on the Dumbo ride. What really brought me back memories was that trip was one snapshot of a 6-year-old looking at me very sadly at the gray clouds from our hotel room balcony. There were also the last proof my dad was happier man once. A few times he appeared in the pictures. Remembering how our parents were always eager to keep us happy, I realized that even if we managed to go on most of the good rides in between showers, they would have not seen or disappointed us and give us one last stop on the way home. The last ditch effort was to correct a nearly ruined vacation. It was then that the smell hit me, accompanied by the visual. I could see the food stand with an old man handing me a hot dog. I could taste the aroma and that scent of rainwater on this summer's day, evaporating into the sun. I could see the puddles colorful, swirling tile surrounding a ticket booth. I was sure now that this place was real, or at least it had been once. Dad was never able to remember it. The few times I asked again, I didn't know even if he tried. After all, it was just hours later, with him behind the wheel, when an old scar on my head itched 28 stitches. I soon stopped thinking about it. As the last 3 years of high school took hold, I would try to occasionally, usually before I went to sleep, pull out one of the memories, images, and good reasons to that place, but my mind had gone quiet. I couldn't get my driver's license until after I graduated, and it was really only so that I could get myself into college. During my first year, I began to feel confident in my driving ability. I took one of the 2 separate trips, to and back from Colorado, or Orlando, and my old house in Ocala. One of the drive in the interstate was the another long one, where there was I took back roads. I looked for billboards, old signs, and even a few stops on the dip-bladed gas stations and rest stops where I looked through the oldest tourist brochures I could find. No references. These trips were out of the way and wasted an entire day, so I didn't try a third time. With college assignments and social life to attend to, my quest for Kittyland fell further into the back burner, sometimes to the point where I forgot it all over again. But in 2008, it resurfaced once more. When I was a kid, I was self-proclaimed Lego master. I got my interest in the agriculture early and loved to build. Looking at the pictures were interesting houses, stores and skyscrapers, sure, even amusement parks at the times were a hobby of mine. Civil engineering on the biggest scale also grabbed me, and starting with the old Sim City games. I even got myself hooked onto the layouts of the cities and roads, and loved looking at or creating the maps in general. I guess it suited me, being logical and analytical type, despite my love for good urban legend or scary story. Wanting to step into the world of urban planning and cartography, I took a job as a country savior after college. It was a manual as you expected, but sometimes the drivers going past you work out shoot glares, probably because they didn't want to get know what you're doing to get out there, and staring at the landscape for our total stations like dorks. At least I go into somewhere on most days, and a part of me was figuring out what the experience might be valuable for tracking down whatever remained of that energetic park. Even then, I still want answers to the nagging questions of what became of the place. My work didn't provide much entertainment, so I used my lights to out the nights out of the map of the center of the state, covering the wide area. At my disposal were things that I hadn't even have before my intentional journey of information began, such as GPS, Google Maps, satellite images, and quick access to a wide array of historical data. The biggest asset I had refined crucial thinking, which gave me the ability to map up the odds of Kittyland having existed in any given area. I wanted to steadily whittle down its possible locations until I had a short list. To no surprise, the internet provided me no direct answers to its existence. I assumed that it had been destroyed or closed long before modems entered our houses, and had no nearby newspaper had any stories of this place. I also inferred that it was from a far away in a town or a city. It must have been maybe in the middle of nowhere, a true roadside attraction, almost too strange for a non sequitur to exist. After weeks of digging, I stumbled upon Kate once more. At first, I didn't know it was her Tumblr page during the site's earlier days, which was a photo blog of an old attractions throughout Florida, with some places of out of state mix as well. As far as photographic subjects went, she really took up for her father's mantle. But I might have passed her if it wasn't for a single post that she made around the beginning of her page's creation. She had taken a picture of an abandoned gate in front of the local small amusement park somewhere in Arkansas. The sign was colorful and cheery, yet utterly decrepit, as it was ready to rot away completely, and it was somewhat familiar. A fact that Kate also picked up was pawn evident by checking her comment on the image. After reading it, I decided it was fully time to contribute. She had written, "The sign reminds me of Kittyland, closer to home. Not that anyone would remember it, but I swear it was real." As soon as I got in touch with her, and we began exchanging emails. At first, she was happy to hear from a new fellow Florida kid, but she didn't exactly believe that I also had memories of the park. She had kept in a like correspondence with Jack over the years, and despite working together, they apparently never heard from anyone else of the recollections. So I understand her skepticism, and I felt crappy that I didn't say anything 10 years ago. Jack had moved out of state, but lost his interest and it never left him. But as soon as three of us were like old friends catching up, we had many long nights together, free waving in private chat rooms. We were all Florida 90s kids with similar interests, and we soon talked a lot about then Kittyland. It was nice to just see to connect to people who grew up within 100 miles of me. We became good friends, and over the months, we synchronized all of what we knew about the park. However, little that was, and began to focus on we were more on Furies. My mad geographic skills, as Jack put it, helps me establish a portable, much smaller range of where Kittyland could have been, in turn of making them feel less delusional in their disbelief that was so real before I came along. As far as I knew it couldn't have been anywhere in the state. They still had contributions of their own and shared with me over their work. Both were more sociable and outgoing than I was. I had spent the last decade visiting a library archives, calling people who could have had some possible connections to the park, and research on the matter of tax codes, construction, land ownership, and the business of the theme parks. But then gave up on several years ago because the boredom had triumphed over their intrigue. The two had lived in a few countries apart and never met. Jack moved to Georgia 6 months ago without a single adult to legitimize the park's history. Like a formal staff member or parent of visiting a child, I could see why they had done that and why they would come to research the park under constant doubt. While Kittyland hadn't been taking over any of our lives, it was powerful enough to force to sometimes disrupt them. We all agreed to continue our work until we could at least provide or disapprove of the park so that we could move on, unfree of its lingering presence. After months of chatting, in late 2008, we decided to meet each other in person. We chose a chain restaurant about 175 in the north. Before then, I never met anyone in person online friends I had ever made. It was strange, new experience for me, but they both seemed pretty normal. We met, sat and ate, and talked over 2 hours. We tried to keep it lighthearted, focusing more on getting to know each other before going on nearby nature walk for some seclusion into driving our shared topic of interest. Jack was a year younger than me, and a gamer and an eternal teenager. He worked from home and even won money online playing game tournaments, though his lifestyle was basically walking tech type. He was also very creative and both programmer and lover of the fine science fiction. He believed that he had visited the park in 1992, the latest of three of us. Kate was the tallest and had confidence to go along with her height. The rimless glasses that have hoovered over a few freckles gave her air of maturity, and she was certainly the most accomplished among us, having served on the ground of MacDill Air Force Base in some technical position. I wasn't sure how high up she was or what she actually did, but I didn't want to pry. She had a soft center, though, and a love for adventure, and a photographer. She carried her camera everywhere. She also visited the park in 1990, but in December. On our second go around the nature trail, we began speaking a little more personally with each other, and then that was when we learned about some obnoxious shares. Similar stories that we cast a mystery in the darker light. All of us had personal tragedies that happened around the same type of our park visits, especially shortly after we came and left the Kittyland. I spoke first, only really mentioning it in passing, saying about how we were hit by a drunk driver that he spun off the ramp right into our car, probably within an hour of leaving the park. It was something I rarely shared with people, but at this point I wanted to search out as many possible connections. And I had found one. We stopped at the boardwalks above the nature trail's marshland, and soon Jack was telling us about how he lost both his maternal grandparents, perhaps the night after the visit, into a house fire in Daytona Beach. He was closer to them than how he was to his own parents, who, accordingly to him, never cared for me that much. But I think Kate's story was the most tragic. When she was 6 and her older sister was 8, they took a week off to visit every theme park in the state that they could find. They wanted a lasting family bonding time, and Kate's sister had advanced leukemia. She was confined into a wheelchair, but Kate could recall that she still enjoyed the trip more than she ever did. Somewhat along the way, before heading home, they must have gone to Kittyland together, but again, for whatever reason, her father never took any pictures of the place. Kate's sister soon after experienced complications and died a week later in the hospice care. Her family was never the same. None of ours, or after our separated tragedies, We had all fundamentally changed our younger lives, maybe grow up a little faster than most kids, and the idea of it was just backwoods park seemed involved. It changed our perception. Jack was the first one to blur out that what we were all thinking, that Kittyland was a cursed place, a bringer of misfortune. I just think he just wanted to change the tone of the uncomfortable conversation. He seemed to adverse in real life's harder events. But I knew we all had briefly entertained that very idea. Kate soon had another take and made a good point. Her sister had suffered through cancer over the years and was on clear decline during the last few months. The park couldn't have caused her illness. There was no reason to assume that it was somehow responsible for a house fire or a car crash either. We decided not to waste any of the day driving around the state or even define portable area looking for remnants. We just knew the odds of actually seeing anything of the theme park now were just too small. Instead, after our dinner, before Kate and Jack started their long journeys home, we advanced that we were clear again, and following earlier emotional discussion, we tried forming a collective usual of the theme park, maybe even a map. If we were able, I could certainly help with that. So, what we did, what we know, or at least what we knew, we started with the basics, the size, colors, and shapes of the park. Then we all moved on to rides and the people who remembered seeing them there. All of our memories were hazy and scattered, so probably none of them were even all too accurate. Even so, after hours at the restaurant table we occupied right near up closing time, I made the first known visual representation of the place as a simple sketch. There were missing blank spots and none of the rides that were likely not in their correct locations. Still, we all agreed that my sketch was actually eerie, similar to the few images that remained tucked away in our heads. The front gates were colorful and simple, with painted balloons floating up in the wooden posts up into an old cast iron marquee. The words Kittyland were painted on it to look like it was written in chalk. Oddly, we could even form a solid coincidence of the gate. Everything inside the park became less vivid and more debatable. Jack thought that there was an empty old merry-go-round with wooden horses. Kay and I both remembered a small roller coaster meant for children, like the kind you'll find at the country fair, might have had a crappy dragon's head painted on its front. We all agreed that it was definitely a bumper car rink, where there were cars and maybe painted like bugs. Aside from the possible petting zoo, funhouse, and inner tube filled with small pool, and amongst other things, we could really recall that there was a few food and toy stands and bathrooms. We summarized that the land was likely no bigger than a typical department store. Amusement parks were always good at disguising their size, appearing larger when you're inside them. We even guessed that the tickets we probably were around $3 to $5 for children. It did, after all, sounded like an equivalent place, not much more than a permanently active mom and pop small town in Florida fairground. They both took pictures of their sketch with their phones, and satisfied at least for now, we all headed to our homes and back into the real world. Weeks went by, and we hadn't talked online much since our greatest get together. I scanned my sketch and sent it to Kate, who posted on her blog for fun, and maybe just to see if anyone had any reactions to it. To kill time, I began casually researching the amusement park lore, and some urban exploration on the side. Places like Disney's Discovery Island and River Country both closed down with their reputations down and of their own had really started to fascinate me. And there were people that managed to get inside the parks all over around the world that have been left to decay, many of them small and once independently run. I was able to visualize myself exploring the rotting Kittyland, taking pictures, proving it was real. Then, on one of the first night of winter, I got a call from my sister, who still lived in the same town as our dad. She was incredibly upset, and I had to force her to tell me what was wrong. Through her tears, she told me the bad news. Our dad had killed himself just hours ago. His depression had been out in the open for many years, but he always seemed to at least manage it by day after day. Maybe it was simple being lonely that his family drove him to the end of everything. Naturally, we both felt guilty and different in multiple ways. I offered to drive down to be there for her, but it was already 1 in the morning, and she insisted that I come in the morning. My sister has always had a strong, independent person, so I was there to make sure to be handling things all right. Before she hung up, she sounded uneasy and like I had something else to say, but she knew that it wasn't right that time. Just before I woke up in the morning, I was then addled by sleeping pills. I had a short but very vivid dream. I was walking in Kittyland and saw everything. It didn't even feel like a dream at all. It felt like a real memory, either returning to me or somehow being born right as I was experiencing it. The moment I was up, I got to work, I wrote down what I saw on my phone, and then I had the dream cycle around my mind a few times. In my attempt to memorize and grab a hold of me tightly, I saw the rides and my other kids and the other stuff. I saw faces. I even tasted the ice cream. I could feel the warm sun just as I could feel the color. Strangely, I could sense each color and how vibrant they were. Yet it looked as if it was washed out by a Polaroid photo. I had no doubt of the sun reoccurrence, that there was the sharpest of the three things that I've ever experienced. And then I remembered what had happened last night and where I had to be. I made at least a 2 hour drive back to my second house, trying my hardest not to think of the park. I had much more important things to tend today, and I didn't even consider it. Now that I was an orphan, I was going to be down to my last off ramp. I spent a week back at home trying to get it all over with. I spoke with the family members on my dad's side that I hadn't seen in years. A few of my mom's relatives were there too. I didn't know how to act, really, so I survived days on autopilot and let everyone else do the talking. I found out that that a death had been brought to a kind of stigma, and shared regret that loomed over everything, and made the proceedings feel heavier than funerals. Christmas didn't exist that year. My sister spent most of her time with her husband and their baby daughter. I kept mostly to myself, and sort of drifted off into the house, trying to recall the good times the three of us had together. Not that there were many. On the last day of my visit, I went up to my old room and sketched out even more refined vision of Kittyland right before I got the dream and forgot about it entirely. It was as if I had seen the entirety of the small park in my head. That morning, through a series of flashbacks, with some guesswork, I was able to create a fairly decent drawn map with all the rides and paths. The only top in the middle of the theme park was blank. It looked like something should logically go there, in the spot between the roller coaster and the pool, but I just couldn't think of anything. My sister came in once I was done. We talked about things like what we should be doing in the house. We knew that this meant that we were in a way official adults now, and our lives would be changing. But just as I was thinking about it, maybe it was time to let go of Kittyland for good. She looked at my sketch. Her eyes widened just a little. She told me that she remembered the front gaze and the time long ago I had asked her about the theme park. She didn't even know how or why she could so suddenly see its entrance in their head again, and thought that she had no images in the past. She was positive that the gate looked just like that. I was once more locked in. On the way back to my apartment, I wonder what else could be work there. My mind began to entertain more supernatural expansions. Was possible that something was a triggering or even creating memories, false or otherwise. I had something that had happened to our childhoods that made us in a way. If another tragedy struck one of us, would we be affected by it again? My sister was too young to create a proper memories when we were supposedly went to Kittyland, and as I was more and more wilder than ever explanations at myself, I settled on one idea that somehow felt entirely possible. What if I actually had no recollection of the theme park until that moment of the accident? It's really easy to forget the chronological order of your own life. There was an email from Kate waiting for me when I got home. The number of Kiddie Landers had grown again, and our newest member was the youngest. I'll call him Tyler. And he claimed to have gone to the park in 1993. He told us nothing else until our first chat room discussion on New Year's Eve. While I had to wait for four of us the earlier encounter with the park, Tyler claimed that he certainly had the last before we even got to the introductions out of the way or learned anything about him. He shared with us on how he remembered it, and it was different kind of memory. He was there when it was burned down, and furthermore, he thought that he knew that the road it was once was on or just coming off coming out of nowhere and posting it on my first sketch. He changed everything with a few message. Anyway, about Kittyland, I grew up with divorced parents. Every other weekend, my dad would pick me up and take me to this house out in the boonies. We used the State Road 40. That was pretty much the only Central Florida road I've ever traveled as a kid. I've done some research on my own while by the way, for some reason, I don't actually remember pulling into the park. So I guess I'm kind of the reclusive, and that I've been following Kate online for a few months. That probably sounds creepy. I was there when it was burning, in what had to be 1993. I would have been 5. Only my memories of it being there. People were screaming. There were fire too, even the kids. None of us even responded yet. I should have told the other beforehand, my fury of the memories possibly being somewhere false. But I don't see anyone die. My parents weren't there. They were all just run away from everything burns. So all I had to do was walk. Like, I'm not scared of any of this. Had therapy for a while. The guy who got me there was convinced that I was just reoccurring the dream. I am sure again that it isn't. The scary part is, the memory makes me feel happy, like a part of me enjoys watching it burn. So, when should we meet? We decided to take it slow with Tyler, and didn't think that Jack would appreciate his apparent fondness of fire, considering his nature of his memory trigger. Tyler's revulsion of the right road that I'd be looking at, and his own story on how he remembered the place already gave us enough to think about for the night. But I went ahead and divulged in my theory, and that the park wasn't even real. That was a false memory that we could all somehow embed it into us, and it was activated when we suffered a personal disruption of childhood. But he was different. Unlike the rest of us, his life had been mostly uneventful. Furthermore, his only images of the park came to him in vivid dreams. He couldn't even remember the times before he dreamed about it. While there was some intrigued by my theory, I wanted to cast off the doubt of his possibility. So I shared my recent occurrences. I told him that I couldn't even have been a coincidence that I saw Kittyland again, and the morning after leaned into what my dad has done. At first, my friends' only responses, aside from condolences, were all of how I was more concerned about the park than my family. I told them that I wasn't obsessive, that it was just something I had to share. I was still grounded in reality. I wasn't thinking about the park all the time. Only I realized at this point I was, and I asked the free to do the next day, only to empathize my steady spiral down obsession. I wanted to us to get together within a week or two, while Tyler, a college student, was still on his winter break. He was close and didn't mind, but Kate and Jack argued that they had just been with me and had better things to do. I told them that I paid for their expenses and that it would be a day or two, and if we didn't find anything, I'd drop it. I went on about how close we were and how the end of things, amazingly, I managed to convince them on hindsight that I had touched the boundaries of ravening lunacy. I guessed that in my moment, my passion to solve the mystery had finally ran over the brim. A week later, during the early July or January doldrums, our group met a small airship strip in the morning. It was a cool, clear day, and we'd be able to see for miles, knowing that it was now or never, on finding the only remnant of all of Kittyland. I had decided to all go out and hired a pilot to fly us through the middle of the Florida in the small plane, or at least the length of State Road 40. As much time as I spent on the satellite maps looking for prospects, I wanted to see the entire area for myself, hoping that one of us would either have some kind of eureka moment upon seeing a specific plot of land from the air. It was expensive, but I had some inheritance coming in the way. Jack and Kate obviously thought I was crazy for going this far, but they still got onto the plane. Tyler was hard to read. He was strange. When we first saw him pull up and get out of his ancient Toyota, we all saw there were two small dark eyes looking at us from under the gray hoodie. He didn't say much at first, and although he did eventually warm up to us, I often caught him staring at me as if studying me. Our small two-engine plane flew from Kaila to the east. The pilot didn't ask what we were trying to see more than once, and we got a good view of the national forest on the way. He kept us as low and slow as possible, and I took many pictures of the roads. We all kept our sight on the landscape below, Tyler especially. We figured anything strange might either stand out with the swaths of trees or be covered up by them, and the remain of it lost forever. At one point, Tyler suddenly turned around and looked out to the right side. I felt compelled as Kate and Jack once did when they saw how we were fixated on something. They leaned over to us and saw that a few miles away was a square patch of dirt not far from State Road 40. It was just off a smaller forest road, heading south. The land was free of all the trees and looked as if construction site of some kind. It was just kind of big enough for a small theme park. With not much on the horizon, I marked the location on the map and asked the pilot to turn around and land. I felt that there was no reason to further out. If that spot wasn't what we were looking for, we wouldn't find another. Back on the ground, we got in my car and I drove out of there. One way I asked Tyler of what he thought I had refrained from asking him. Something more mystical like if he felt anything. Although at this point, I wouldn't have been surprised if he did. He still remained invested, but Kate and Jack were clearly losing what little interest remained. I couldn't blame them. They had put more work in chasing after this place than I ever had, until just recently. Deep into the national forest, with no other cars around for miles, I slowed, stopped, tried to sense anything off about the area, and then I turned onto the southbound road. My palms were sweating on the wheel. I drove off to another quarter mile. I found a currently empty construction site, and we pulled off to the road. We all got out, started taking pictures right away of dirt. It was quiet and lonely out there, with nothing else to do but the faint sounds of nature and the thick layers of trees. The others were unimpressed, and the area didn't exclude of anything of feeling other than isolation. We walked into the square earth where the trees had been cleared, and the only signs of human presence were mover tracks and sparse litter. We didn't even see anything out of the ordinary, and then the land was unmarked. It did it didn't look like anything putting off on a building of some sort out here. Kate assumed that it must have been off of a parking lot or for park visitors. The plot of land was no bigger than a typical department stores. Every 15 minutes, either Kate or Jack asked if we could leave now. I asked for another extension each time, and in any case, we had only taken my car, so they would have to wait until I was satisfied. Tyler, at the least, had grown some genuine satisfaction when he seized up on the place, although to his usual silent self, it began to give me the strange looks again. I didn't know what we should be looking for, or if this was still the right spot. Still, we hunted a bit for everything: foundations, bricks, buried toys, trees growing around old fence or lamppost. We searched for the old garbage that would have survived, like soda lids, plastic toys, and metallic ride remains, such as springs and screws. We scoured by the nearby trees for toppled signs and kicked the dirt away, maybe to reveal a ticket stubs or maps. If there was a small theme park out there, there should have been some lingering evidence of it.